All right, so we are beginning our first set of notes. This is notes on experimental design. You should have experimental design notes part 1 in the day 3 experimental design folder on Schoology. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is, would you want to take a medication that had not ever been scientifically tested? Of course you wouldn't. You need to know that any medication that you take, be it one that you get from the doctor as a prescription or one that you buy over the counter, before it ever makes it into a bottle and onto a shelf, it has been tested hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times. And it gets tested first on small animals like mice and rats, and then larger animals like rabbits and maybe cats, dogs, monkeys. And then once it gets through all of that without anybody dying or growing a third eyeball, it then moves on to human trials. Now, I know that you're thinking, oh my gosh, what human would sign up to take this medication that hasn't been tested? Well, if you've got some sort of a disease or a disorder that makes you very uncomfortable and sick, and there's no medication for it, you might be willing to sign up for a study that maybe possibly is going to develop a medication that's going to help you feel better. So a lot of times in those studies, they give the medication to some people, and I mean, they don't know what could happen. It could kill them. They could get a rash. They could grow a third eyeball, although that's unlikely. But they also could possibly be given a placebo. So I want you to write that word down if you think you want to. It's not one that I'm going to test you on again, but it's one that people tend to be interested in, a placebo. So to be able to scientifically test a medication, you've got to give one group of people the medicine, and then you've got to give another group of people something that they think is the medicine, but it isn't. And that is called a placebo. Very often it's a sugar pill or something that just really doesn't have any medicine in it at all. And sometimes people get better on placebos because it's all in their head. There's a movie that your parents probably have seen called The Birdcage, where one of the Nathan Lane's character is just completely, he's just so off the chain with anxiety and worry. And so one of his friends gives him, he always says, I need my Pirin tablets. Someone get me my Pirin tablets. And it turns out that Pirin tablets are just baby aspirin with the A and the S scratched off, so that it's Pirin, and he thinks that it's this medicine that's going to make him better. So placebo is something that really doesn't have any medicine in it, but it makes you feel better anyway. How about a plane? Would you like to get into an airplane that had not been scientifically tested? Of course not. So there's a reason why you don't have 5-year-olds design the airplane that you ride in. You have people who have studied engineering and aerodynamics and know how all that stuff works. You let them build the aircraft. Just plain safe. So where does all this come from? Well, it's called experimental design. When someone is getting ready to develop a medicine or develop a new kind of airplane, it's got to be tested over and over again. And it's got to be tested following a certain way of doing things, and that's called experimental design. And the reason why they do that is because scientists have to follow that plan to be sure the results they get are valid and reliable. So valid tests for what it says it tests for. For example, if you were studying for a civics quiz on the Bill of Rights and you'd studied and you get there and it's in Japanese. Well, if you don't already know Japanese, you're going to fail that test. And then your civics teacher will be like, oh, they don't know their Bill of Rights. Is that a valid statement? No, it's not, because the test wasn't valid. The test said it was testing your Bill of Rights, but it really was testing your Japanese knowledge and your Bill of Rights knowledge. And if you didn't study Japanese, then you weren't ready for that test. So it was not valid. It was not testing for what it says it tested for. A reliable experiment is conducted many times with the same result. So you can conduct the same test over and over and over again and get the same or similar results. So like the temperature that water boils at sea level, the how fast an object falls at certain altitudes, all of that stays the same no matter what. It's been tested over and over again. So we've already said that this careful plan is called experimental design. An experimental design diagram is created by the scientists when they are planning their experiment. It's a useful tool to help the scientists stay organized and watch out for errors. So as you're making your experimental design diagram, you might notice, oh, that's going to be a problem, and you can fix it. Or maybe you look at the experimental design diagram of someone else that's already conducted an experiment similar to yours, and you can see where they made an error. And when you make your experimental design, you can fix it. The first step in planning an experiment is developing an idea. The best way to do this is to just make observations using your 5 senses. Pay attention to what's going on in the world around you and what things make you go, I wonder why that happens, or I wonder what would happen if I did this. My first 4 years teaching were at a school called New Dominion School. It doesn't exist anymore, but Discovery School in Buckingham still exists, and it's kind of like it. It was a residential wilderness program for boys. They were there for usually 16 to 18 months. And very often, or they built their own structures and all that, and they slept outside mostly. So I had a student there who had been there for a long time, and he had gotten a bouncy ball from his mom at some point in a care package. And once you've been there for a while, you earn, some freedoms. And so he could walk around campus by himself, and he would bounce the ball wherever he went. And he said, Miss Harris, I just feel like, I know it's been a while, but I feel like back in the winter that the ball bounced higher, and it doesn't bounce as high now. So that was the thing that he was like, that was his idea. Made him go, I wonder why. So the next thing he did was to do some research. And you can do research online. You can do research in the library, or you can do research by exploring with the actual items. So he had already done the research by exploring with the items, by bouncing the ball in different seasons. So then he needed to do some research about thermal expansion and what effect that has on objects and on different objects before he could move on with his design. So once you've done all that, you come up with a question. So his question was, does temperature affect how high the ball bounces? I'm going to erase and scroll up now. So give me just a second. Make sure you're pausing and all that stuff as needed to get things done. All right, so you're going to take that question and you're going to turn it into an if-then statement. So, for example, if the plant has fertilizer applied to it, then it will grow taller. So, for our example with my student, if the weather is colder, then the ball will bounce higher. So you take that question of, does temperature affect the bouncy height? And then you turn it into an if-then statement. This is your hypothesis. A hypothesis is an educated guess. It's a smart guess. You're taking what you know already about the world, what you know about the object, what you learned from your research, and you're making an educated guess as to what will happen when you begin your experiment. From your hypothesis, you can determine your variables. Variables are things that change in an experiment. So there can be lots of different kinds of variables. Anything that changes in an experiment is a variable, but the two that you should remember, the two that should kind of tickle the back of your brain when you hear the word variable from back in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade are, of course, independent and dependent. And I bet you were already saying that with me. So your hypothesis can easily be formed once you identify those variables, because the hypothesis is just if something about the IV, then something about the DV. So in our student's example, if the temperature is colder, then the ball will bounce higher. All right, so now we're going to take some time identifying IV. So the IV, the independent variable, is the thing that I change. It's the thing that the scientist changes on purpose, expecting there to be a resulting change to the object. So what are you going to change about the object or its environment? So for our first one, we're talking about our student, my student back in New Dominion with his bouncy ball. And he says he wants to see what effect temperature has. So there's our first clue, effect. tells us what effect something has. Well, that something is going to be your IV. So temperature is the thing that we're going to change. Temperature is the thing that's expecting to have an effect. Temperature is the IV. All right, I want you to pause and see if you can guess what the IV would be in 19, 20, and 21. And then after you pause, come back and I will give you the answers. All right, so for 19, I want to see what effect soil type has on seed germination. You got to know what germination is. Germination is when a seed goes from being just a plain old seed to being a little baby plant, where it busts out of its seed coat and sprouts its little root and its little leaves and gets ready to be a plant. That is germination. So the question is, what effect does soil type have on germination? So what's the thing that's having an effect? Soil type. What's the thing we're going to change? Soil type. Number 20, I want to see what the length of string makes a pendulum swing the fastest. My IV is going to be, all right, you got to know what a pendulum is. So a pendulum is anything that's hanging from a central point, has a weight down on the bottom, and swings back and forth. So pendulum is anything that swings. So this is where the term pendant, a necklace, when you wear a necklace and it's got something hanging from it, it's called a pendant because it hangs around your neck and dangles down. It's a pendant, like a pendulum. There you go, pendulum. So I want to know which length of string makes the pendulum swing fastest. So what's the thing that I'm changing? I'm changing the length of the string length. So that's my IV. I want to see which food type the geckos like most. My IV is going to be. So what's the thing that I'm changing? Well, it's the food I'm offering them. So food type is going to be my IV. All right, pause it if you need to get something written down, but I'm clearing it and moving on. So now let's identify the DV, the dependent variable. So the IV was the thing that I changed. The DV is the thing that I measure. So the dependent variable is the thing that you're going to measure. You might be measuring how tall or how many or how far or how much pressure or the temperature, how much. You might be counting the number of leaves. You also can use, so that's quantitative data. You also can use qualitative data, the color of something or just how healthy or how not healthy it looks. All of those things can be used as your dependent variable that you measure. So what does the dependent variable tell us? It tells us how the object is going to change as a result of the IV. So for our first example, my student with the bouncy ball, he thinks that temperature is going to affect how high the ball can bounce, and he's going to measure bounce height in centimeters. So my IV is temperature, my DV is going to be bounce height because that's the thing that I am measuring. All right, again, pause and see if you can come up with an answer to 24, 25, and 26, and then come back to get the right answer. All right, welcome back. I think that soil type is our IV, and that's going to affect how fast the seed germinates. So I'm going to measure germination time in days. What am I measuring? Germination time. So you could have put germination speed or germination time or time it takes to germinate. Any of those are fine. I think that the short string will move the fastest. So my IV is the length of the string. So I'm going to measure pendulum swings in cycles per minute. So what am I measuring? Pendulum swings. So that is our DV. And the last one for today, we made it. Whew. I think that peaches will be the type of food eaten most by the geckos. I'm going to measure in milliliters eaten per day. So the DV is going to be milliliters eaten or amount of food eaten. Any of those would be fine. All right, that's it for today's notes. Thanks. Bye.